So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, lovely people, wherever you are watching from in the world. I have been counting down the days to this very interview. I have got Scarlett Lewis with me today, and I'll get you to introduce yourself in a minute, Scarlett. I am so touched that we finally connect. Scarlett is one of the very few people where we didn't get the chance to do a pre-interview, a pre-chat. Yet I have looked at your website, I read your story. I was so touched by not just what happened, but in particular with what you did with it, because that is always the focus of our Upscroll Brief interviews here. And people will know very shortly why you were such a perfect match for that. So, Scarlett, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself quickly to our audience, if that's okay. Good morning, good evening.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on, Marie. It's an honor to share my story with your audience. My name's Scarlett Lewis, and this chapter, I guess I would say, started 9.5 years ago when my 6-year-old son was murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School in his first grade classroom. And of course, I was devastated, in shock, came back to this little farmhouse where I raised my 2 boys as a single mom. A few days later, thinking I could never go back there, but I did, to get his clothes for the funeral. And on my way out, I saw a message that he had written before he died, but I was just seeing it now on our kitchen chalkboard. And It was 3 words, phonetically spelled, because he was in first grade and just learning to write. But those 3 words were nurturing, healing, love. And I was just stunned. I mean, where did they come from? I knew that it was a spiritual awareness that he wasn't going to be on earth for very much longer. He wanted to leave a message of comfort for his family and friends, but it was even more than that. I mean, I was grappling with how a former graduate of the Newtown school system could come back to his elementary school and perpetrate such a heinous crime. And just in shock and so many questions. And that really answered it for me, actually. I realized that if the shooter had been able to give and receive nurturing, healing love, that the tragedy would never have happened. And I knew that I was going to be spending the rest of my life spreading that message. And ironically, it's 9.5 years later now. I can't believe it's been that long, because of course it feels like yesterday, but I'm in Washington, D.C. and I have so much passion for this, just as much as the first time I ever saw that message. And that's what I am doing. I literally created a school-based program that teaches us how to get in between what happens to us and how we respond, to be able to choose love in that thoughtful response. And I know that it would have saved my son's life. It's all about the ability to face difficulty. We're all the same in the want and need to love and be loved. And we all feel pain. We all feel hurt. A lot of times, Marie, after I speak, people come up to me and they say, oh, I want to share my story, because I share my story. People want to share theirs, and they say, it's nothing like yours. I lost a child, but you lost a child in the worst way. It's nothing like yours. And of course, then they share their story, and I'm thinking, your story is worse than mine. There is no comparison in grief. I think your audience.
I love that you say that. I want to interrupt you here very quickly, Scarlett, because I so want to highlight this. I always make a huge point about comparison. It's not helping anyone heal. It's the holding space, the being there for each other, the listening to the story, to giving your story space. And that's what I want to do here with this interview. So when you talked about that would have been saving your son's life, I actually want to go a little bit more into the story, if you're okay with that, because I know for a fact that's something really, really beautiful, incredibly beautiful happened within that tragedy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Are you talking about Jesse's bravery?
Yes.
Yes, actually, Jesse was known as the little boy who stood up to the shooter and saved 9 of his classmates' lives before
I
losing
have
his own.
goosebumps. This is so
Yeah,
incredible.
it was
This
so
is, yeah.
Jesse. It was so Jesse. I mean, while I was waiting at the firehouse, and
Mm.
we were told for hours,
Yeah.
the kids are probably hiding.
Mm.
We're gonna. It's gonna take a long time for us to find them, and
Yeah.
and I thought in my mind, well, Jesse probably led a small contingent of kids
Mm.
out into the woods,
Mm.
and it's going to
Yeah.
take a while for them to find him. So I had already had an idea that he would do something incredibly
Mm.
brave, and of course he did, which is amazing. He was 6 years
Yeah.
old, just
Unbelievable.
incredible.
Wow. Can I just take you back a little bit because you said you were all there at the firehouse. How, when were you called to the school? How were you notified? I mean, that in itself, I can't even begin to understand how that must have felt for you as a mom. I don't know how that would feel like. And I often talk to my kids about it because when they hear about shootings, and unfortunately, we do hear a lot about shootings here in Australia. We always feel so safe compared to that. My son, my older son, for a fact, doesn't want to go to America because of school shootings. And I'm like, it's such a big country. There's so much more than just that. But it really petrified him, it left such an impression on him that this is his number one reason why he doesn't want to go to America. And that to me is really sad. I've been there, I don't know, 30 times in my life. I've traveled a lot to America in my younger years. When I was a flight attendant, I was there all the time, But so I'm not even sure. I have to ask so directly. Please ignore my cultural innocence here, but it's that whole, do you really live like that? Do you live like, oh, this could happen any day? That must be such a shock when you get this phone call, no matter if that's like a more common occurrence in America than it is here in Australia. What talk us through that? What happened there for you when you received that phone call?
It's interesting because obviously it had happened before. And
Mm-hmm.
the one that really stuck out in my mind was Columbine. And,
Mm-hmm.
you just really think that it will never happen to you. I mean, it
Yeah.
happens to people whose picture is on the cover of People magazine, right? You know that
Yeah.
will never be
Yeah.
you. And so I never thought about it. And then you think, well, I live in Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook is
Mm.
this little borough of Newtown, and it's, there are old houses and stone
Mm.
walls, and we live on a little farm, and it's just a really quaint, nice area to live. And things like that don't happen in those places. And
Yeah.
so, that morning I sent Jesse off, as well as his older brother, who was in the nearby middle school, just like every other
Mhm.
day. In fact, that morning I had hugged Jesse goodbye as his dad picked him up at the end of the driveway. And I noticed that he had written on the frost on my car. Remember, it's December 14th. It's cold in Connecticut. He had written with his little fingernail on the frost on the side of my car, "I love you." And he had drawn
Oh.
hearts in all my windows. And I thought, oh, I was really present as a parent.
Mm.
By the way, that's the way to live your life with the fewest regrets, is to be present with the
Yeah.
ones that you love. And I was, and thank goodness it was really before phones became an addiction for everyone.
Mm.
I didn't have a TV because I didn't want to compete with the TV and lose with
Mm.
my kids. So it was really just them and I. And I said, don't go. I ran inside to the house. I did have a phone. I brought it out. I positioned him next to the message and I took a picture. I even deleted one because it was overexposed, because it was the
Mm.
early morning sun. I took
Yeah.
another one. And I took a real close up of the "I love you." I mean, what a beautiful moment. I gave him a
Mm.
real big hug. I sent him off to school, and then I went to work.
Yeah.
And so my commute was about 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes depending on traffic. So I get to work and I'm really like just getting a cup of coffee and sitting down. And one of my workmates was working from home, so she was watching the news, and she instant messaged me and she said, there's been a shooting in Sandy Hook. Honestly, I thought terrible. I thought horrible, but probably a bank or I don't know where, and then someone else walked up to me and said, "You live in Sandy Hook, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, there's been a shooting in a school." And I'm like, "Oh, that's terrible." I still didn't think, it just, and so he's, basically was like, "You should go." And I was like, "Okay, you're right." So I got in, and I guess friends were calling me and giving me information. Remember, I had like a 45-minute or an hour drive home, and they were saying, "Oh, a teacher got shot in the foot." And so then, at this point, I knew it was at Sandy Hook. I knew we were supposed at Sandy Hook Elementary School. I knew that we were supposed to go to the firehouse at the end of the cul-de-sac to meet the kids. So I'm driving home and I get this message, "Oh, there's a teacher that's been shot in the foot." And I thought, okay, domestic. So, an angry boyfriend husband came in and a terrible, terrible, but Jesse will be afraid. I'm glad that I'm going to pick him up, type of thing. Yeah. But when I got there, I had to park a quarter of a mile away at least. There were so many people. They were all, it was chaos. There were Army helicopters, Army men, like first responders running all over in tactical gear. And I ran to the firehouse, and I'm trying to ask anybody, and it was just total chaos. And obviously, they would say, "Well, if you don't have your child, go to the back room and put their name on a list of missing people." And I'm like, "I'm not putting his name on a list. I'm just going to get him. Like, I'm just picking him up. I'm not putting his name on a list." So somebody said, "Oh, I think he went to the house next door to the firehouse, this little yellow, cute colonial house." And so I ran next door and I knocked on the door, and the person that answered said, "Yeah, I think Jesse was here, but I think he went over to the daycare on the other side." So Jesse's dad and I are texting frantically, and I'm like, "Go look at the daycare and I'll go in the firehouse." So he did that. He's not here. I'm like, "He's not here either." I tried to go up to the school, and there were barricades and Army men, like, "You're not coming up here." I'm like, "Yes, I am. I'm going to get my son." And he's like, "You're not going here." And I couldn't. So finally, I feel like it was a long time. I went to that back room. I didn't want to. A teachers had come out. They were eating pizza. It was almost surreal. And I'm like, "Where is Jesse?" And they're like looking at each other like, and I didn't even get it. I was like, they're not telling me anything, So I finally went, I put his name on the list, and I remember, like, it was such a long list, and I had to turn it over and write on the back. And I was thinking, oh, I didn't think anything. You don't think all those people could be dead. That's like, that thought doesn't even cross your mind. And, a lot, we waited hours, and a lot of people are upset
just
about
like that. A procedure thing,
It was, but I kind of felt like it gave me an opportunity to come to that conclusion myself, with all the questions that were being asked and all the time that went by. And I think that there was some benefit to that.
I can't even imagine, because what you are describing is like walking into a movie scene. It's so surreal. You don't think that that's reality, and for you it must have been quite similar to, you come to terms with it, to grasp the severity of that situation, what was actually going on, to have somebody tell you can't go in there, and you're like, "Yeah, I'm picking up my son." I can so imagine, like, so let me ask you, how old is your older son?
He was 12 years old at the time. And he was in 7th grade and in lockdown in Spanish class. And he actually texted me and asked if he could come and wait with us. Because I was telling him, well, we're just waiting for them to find Jesse. And
so
I was
about it as well.
Yeah, but that never crossed my mind that he would be dead. I said, come and wait, because, when they find him, he's going to want his older brother. My mom lives across town with my stepfather. They were going to Dunkin' Donuts. I'm like, can you pick JT up on the way, and they did. And so unknowingly, my older son, who had already experienced trauma in his life, into the worst day of our lives. And so he was there the whole time, just having, obviously, I had no idea how it was going to end up.
Yeah. And you know what, in hindsight, I think despite you thinking you invited him into trauma, I think it was also his way of being eased into it, is probably the worst word to use, but to really have that time to also be there step by step and not, get the hard cold facts afterwards. I'm not sure. It is really hard to say in hindsight,
Thank you
but
for
it's
that
really
perspective. I've never thought about that perspective, and I like it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. That was just the first thing I thought of, because I've got 2 boys, and I can't even imagine what that would be like. And for them, I had them with me every step of the way, what we had to do after Rob died. And I just knew they had to be part of that. And I think I really truly believe that your older son had to be there, and that it was his way of, coming to terms with it and being fed all that entire story spoon by spoon, and not, have the whole thing afterwards. I think that was quite important.
I like that perspective. And I will say that having him there and watching him watch me, I'd had, first responders came up to me and asked me, like, do you have a recent picture of Jesse? And I thought, well, that's not a good sign that they're asking. And then, does he have any identifying marks? And I know that's not a good sign. And so I became very aware. I really practiced being present in my life. And I was trying to be present during this time, especially for JT. And I realized that he was learning in the moment from me how to deal with difficulty, roadblocks, challenges, trauma, pain, and suffering right then and there. And it really did help me rise to the occasion in the moment, because I thought, wow, I'm teaching him right now how he's going to handle trauma for the rest of his life. So I'm going to have to.
Incredible that you even thought that in that situation. It just shows that you have been through trauma before. And I think it's the hardest part for us to be so present, but it's also the biggest gift if we can be present. I often talk about hidden gifts in adversity, and I certainly think that this was probably one of them, for you to be so present and to think that, and to have that as a catalyst for thinking more clearly, being more present, and really being aware of what was going on. It's probably one of them. So Scarlett, how and when did you then receive the final news that Jesse had passed?
It was later that afternoon. This kind of tells you the chaos. There were people wandering around, and there was a man that was there, and somebody had brought us chairs, because we were just, we were supposed to go to this back room with all the other parents, but it was chaos, and people were upset, and they were demanding, they were yelling, and I didn't want JT or myself in that environment. I remember thinking, I want peace. I want peace. So I kept us outside, and somebody brought us chairs, and we're sitting in chairs. And so I remember this man approaching me, and I knew what he was going to say before he said it, but he bent down on one knee and he said, "There's no easy way to say this. Your son's dead." And then he got up and he walked away, and a policeman came over and said, "What did that guy just say to you?" I said, he said, "Jesse's dead." They said, "He's not supposed to say that." And so they went over there. I guess he wasn't supposed to be the one to tell me, but I already knew it. I had already come to that conclusion. And then I said, I was waiting. My brothers, I have 3 brothers, and they all came. 2 lived in Connecticut, but 1 lived in Boston. And to give you kind of an idea of the time frame, my brother had gotten the news, gotten together with his wife, left work, and driven down. It's like a 3.5-hour drive. And we had just learned that Jesse had died. And so and it didn't really sink into me. I mean, I was very calm. I was trying to be a good role model for JT, and
Mm,
it really didn't hit me until I looked over and I saw my mom going to meet my little brother across the parking lot and told him, and he bent over double. And then for me, that's when it really became real, when I saw
mm,
his reaction. So we
yeah.
left. They brought a van, and I remember going back to my car, and I had a car seat in my
Mhm,
car. Jesse was still riding in a car seat.
mm,
And I just
yeah.
remember seeing that in the back and just thinking, I don't need that anymore. I'm not going to use that anymore. Like,
Mm,
it was tough. And then I thought, I can never go home. I can never go
mm,
home. I can't go back to my house and walk in the door and I'm going to see Jesse's boots and his coat.
mm,
And I'm going to see his toothbrush by the sink, and I'm going to see his PJs where he threw them off this morning. Like I will never go there again. And so we went to my mom's. Thank goodness she lived across town.
mm,
And I didn't go back until it got down to dressing him in the casket. And it was like, well, if you don't pick out the clothes, then his dad is, and we weren't together. And I don't know, it just
yeah.
was so important to me to be able to
Yeah.
dress him, and that the
I can
clothes
relate to that.
were warm because it was cold. Not that that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
No, it does. Yeah, I totally understand that, really. Mm. I know it's not, we talk about that at the beginning. Comparison doesn't help anyone. In my story, I was the one picking up the clothes for my husband, and it was really important for me to do that in a way that it suited him. I couldn't
Yes.
see Rob being in a suit and tie. He wore it for work all the time, but in his private life, he was very, like, I remember we buried him in his t-shirt, keep calm and agree with that. He loved it. He absolutely loved that t-shirt. And oh, I'm gonna get all emotional, but it was just really important for me, to pick out the clothes that suited him. And I think who's the best person to pick out the clothes for a 6-year-old is definitely the mom. I can so understand why you had to do that, why you had to
Yeah.
think, how he needs to be dressed. It does make so much sense. The whole, is it too cold? Is it too warm? You really do see them as your child and not as a dead body. So it does make a lot of sense that you do want to choose that. I find that very beautiful. So how did you go when you
No,
had to go back?
well, we were very blessed because we got to have an open casket,
Mm,
with assault weapons. That's
yeah,
not always the case. And
yeah.
so we live on a farm, and Jesse was a little farm boy. So I dressed him in
Mm,
his boots.
mhm,
And, I remember looking at his fingernails and thinking that dirt under his fingernails is from the farm,
yeah.
and he was having a good time. And we
Mm,
also buried, I chose a polo sweater that he loved. It was gray, and I had a white turtleneck, and we buried him
no.
with an army helmet my friend had
Mhm.
given him that he wore all over, and we tucked that under his arm.
That's beautiful. I really love that. I've just been looking down because I want to see if we have any comments or questions here, because I always check that. I make sure that I see if anything was coming in, and I was so focused on your story the entire time that I forgot that the phone, the screen has gone flat. Um, so when you went through the funeral, that must have been one of the most surreal experiences for you. Who helped you prepare with all of that? Did you do all of that on your own, or it must have been incredible having that? What a surreal moment.
Thank goodness, it was like everything just came together, and I didn't do anything. I
Yeah.
have, a sister-in-law who is very organized, and she walked around with
Mm,
a clipboard, and she
mm,
she gave me two choices for grave sites. And I mean, she was
yeah.
incredible what she did. And I had just returned to church 6 weeks earlier. My neighbor went to a great church, and so I told the boys, they were acting up, and I'm like, we're going back to church. And so we had a home, you know what I mean? They were
Yeah.
going to Sunday school every morning. So they had teachers that knew them, and I had
Yeah.
a place to go. I mean, other
Mm.
than that, it's like you don't think about things like that. And I had a church family that opened their
Yeah.
doors to me. So that was really beautiful. And they shared memories of Jesse there.
Mm.
And it seems like there was some divine intervention in that, because I certainly could not have done that on my own.
Mm.
And I think that's, important to note that victims' families, I was a victim's mom, but there's also the perpetrators too, and they don't get the parents, the perpetrators' parents, they don't get the love that the victims do. I mean, if you can imagine, I was in receipt of love and condolences from the world. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yes,
everyone was
I
shocked
do.
with me. And
Mm.
our little downtown was turned into a memorial. Somebody donated 26 Christmas trees. Remember, it was 2 weeks before Christmas, and
Mm.
everybody was donating personalized ornaments. So every victim had their own tree, and there were presents under the trees, and there were little memorials that were set up all over. I mean, there was just beauty and love everywhere you turned. And I
Yeah.
felt so loved with that. And I think about so many victims' parents don't get that. And I was
Yeah.
very blessed to have that, because it was
Mm.
really comforting to me. And the majority of
That's
the
beautiful.
cards that I got were from kids all over the world,
Oh,
handmade. And it was just
wow.
really beautiful.
That's incredible. That is really touching, to receive that from, yeah, I can imagine how much comfort that would have brought.
Mhm.
How did JT go throughout the funeral and the days, months thereafter? Because, I feel sometimes we're so cradled in, and still also, everything feels so surreal. I felt like I went into functioning mode. I just did one day at the time. I just did what I had to do and went through the motions. Um, but you do eventually come out of that functioning mode and start making proper decisions again. And how did you and JT go throughout all of that? And yeah.
It had been just JT and I until Jesse came along. So it was just
Mm.
JT and I again, 6 years
Mm.
later.
Yeah.
And so we were very close. We dealt with it differently, though. I felt
Mm.
compassion for the shooter.
Yeah.
I was helped with finding Jesse's message and knowing that if the shooter had been able to give and receive nurturing, healing love, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. I knew that somebody that could do something so heinous must have been in a tremendous amount of pain. So I
Yeah.
came at it from a compassionate view, and a lot of my family did not. They did not
Yeah.
understand that,
Yeah.
and JT was very angry, and I
Mm.
completely understand that.
Yeah.
And we both had to go on a journey of forgiveness. And
Mm.
I think grief is a very personal thing,
Mm.
and you
Yeah.
can share it, but I think ultimately you have connection and you have love from everyone, but I think it's something that you go through on your own. And
Yeah.
we both had to do that. We both went on a separate journey together.
Mm. That's incredible to say that way. Both went on a separate journey together, because it makes so much sense, and I always say every journey of grief is just as unique as the person experiencing it. And it's so true, like just looking at both my sons, they dealt with losing their dad at such a young age completely differently, very differently. They couldn't have been more polar opposite their entire life, and even in their grief. And then one wanted to
Yeah.
talk about it all the time, the other one didn't want to have a bar of it, and then it completely flipped. And then I always felt like, do I talk about him, do I not, and I just kept it very as natural as I possibly could. When I felt like talking about Rob, I would. And I never forced it, but I also didn't force myself to not do it, if that makes sense, so
It
it
does.
became quite a natural thing. And to have JT and you doing the journey together, but so differently, I can understand what you're saying there, that I can understand both sides, the compassion and the hate. It both makes a lot of sense, and it's definitely easier if you can have that compassion, but it's not easy to have it, if that makes sense. It's really, it speaks volumes for you to be able to do that. And I also believe that it definitely helped you in your healing journey to have just this message and to have the compassion. So please tell us, what did you do with this beautiful message? Because this message obviously planted an amazing seed for something that is really quite incredible. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So I knew that I wanted to spread this message of nurturing, healing, love. I mean, it brought meaning to the tragedy for me, and I wanted to be part of the solution. I knew what happened was 100% preventable, just like all school shootings are. And so I thought, I couldn't go back to my old life. I just thought, you know what? My life has changed so much and I didn't have any control over that. I'm going to change everything. So I quit my job and I started researching, how can we prevent school shootings and the suffering that leads to them. And so I kind of went on a journey, and I with this message, knowing that I was going to spread that message, I was introduced to social emotional learning, which is basically essential life skills and how you self-regulate, how you manage your emotions, self-awareness, how to have healthy relationships and responsible decisions. I found this incredible type of learning. And I thought, first of all, I was 44 years old. I don't have these skills and tools. And these, if the shooter had these skills and tools, the tragedy would not have happened. So I went out, there's decades of research behind the benefits of teaching kids these essential life skills for a lifetime. It's just mind-boggling how incredibly powerful they are. So, and I realized that less than 10% of schools actually teach them at all, 9.5 years ago. So I created a program that is lifespan, because I know that my life is better because I learned these skills and tools and now I practice them. Obviously I'd give all of the growth back to have one more second with Jesse, but that's not going to happen. And so I created a program and I give it away because I know that this not only prevents violence, and there's research to prove that, but it also prevents suicide and substance abuse and and a lot of mental illnesses. And it's a direct path to flourishing. And we know this through science, and every child deserves access. So I'm very passionate. I made it my mission to make sure that every child has access to what we know is in their best interest, to, just to really let them know that, we're all connected by the want and need to love and be loved, but we all also feel pain. We are going to be hurt. We don't want our kids to be hurt, but they're going to feel pain. And so it's our responsibility to give them the coping skills and the social emotional competence that they need to not only manage that pain, but to grow through it and learn from it, be strengthened by it. And so
that's a key factor. Absolutely.
It's so key. It's called post-traumatic growth. And that's research too. And to teach kids that you can't always choose what happens to you, but you can always choose how you thoughtfully respond. That's how you take personal power back. And we teach a powerful formula to return that. It's called locus of control back to you. So you have self-worth and you make things happen. You have hope. And the formula starts with courage. And for the older kids, we use Jesse's example of courage. And we use courage every day. Science says courage is like a muscle that we can practice it to strengthen it. And of course, anybody who's lost a child knows that it takes courage to get up and put your best foot forward and try to find meaning. And then the next one is gratitude, the next character value. And these are neuroscientifically accurate in order. Gratitude is so important to remember things that we're grateful for and healing on that, because the normal way that we think with our negative bias, we focus on the negative. We have tens of thousands of thoughts every day. The majority of them, on a good day without loss, are negative and repetitive. And so we just need to be aware of that. And we use gratitude to shift the focus of our lens. So you could be thinking negative thoughts, angry, resentful, frustrated, and you can only focus on one thought at a time. So literally you can bring a grateful thought in and you can shift that focus of your lens. You can only think of one thought at a time. So then we move into forgiveness, and forgiveness is probably the most powerful part of my journey. Forgiving the shooter, but also there's so much to forgive, right? In any situation, but forgiving myself for mistakes that I made, forgiving mistakes that were made with the shooter when he went to school, state laws that were violated, the fact that he was bullied, the fact that he had needs that were known and not met, little things that could have been done that weren't. There's a lot, you boil it down to like, you pay taxes to keep your kids safe and in school. And the majority of my homeowner's tax goes to schools, and I get that tax bill. It's like things pop up all the time for forgiveness. And I think, this is really hard to pay because the majority of this goes to schools, and I sent my kid to school and he didn't come home. So
and I think it's also such a really interesting and very important component that when something like that happens, such a deep tragedy, and then learning about it afterwards and knowing this could have been prevented. And it is so easy for everyone in that situation, for the entire world, to point towards that shooter and go like, this is a really like bad whatever, like you are the one. But it takes an entire system. It really takes a village to raise a child, and we are part of that village. And to come back and actually take on the responsibility that we have in raising our children, it's so much easier to point the finger, but to actually stand up and then also go into that forgiving yourself, for the things that we have or haven't done in that situation. That's a huge step. That's really quite incredible. And I'm really grateful that you mentioned that, because it really takes all of us to come together and own that and change that.
I was watching the reactions, and everybody was focusing all of the blame on the shooter and his mom, who gave him access to the guns. But I was thinking, wow, that's not accurate, because obviously he's responsible and she made a mistake, but this happened before. And of course, in America, it's happened over 350 times since. That can't be all of their fault. And if it's not all their fault, then whose fault is it? And here's the thing. I think sometimes, we stay stuck in victim mode. And I remember very shortly afterwards, I was having an interview and I was saying, I take my part of the responsibility for what happened. And I remember my mom going, "Don't ever say that. You didn't know the shooter. Why would you say that? It's not your fault." And I said, well, look, this happened in my community, in my son's school. And people need to start taking responsibility for what's going on and stop waiting for somebody else to fix it, or stop blaming other people. Like, where does that get us, and where has it gotten us? But here's the thing that happens when you take responsibility. You take that one little step, you make the statement, you do a little something, and it feels empowering. It feels so much better than being a victim and blaming. And I actually had this experience, and I'd like to share this. It was a few days after the tragedy. I'm sitting on my mom's couch. I never sit still. I'm a single mom with 2 boys. I have a farm, a full-time job. And so I'm sitting there, and one of the nice things that the state of Connecticut did was they sent therapists basically to be with each of the families. And this therapist that came, she's actually like a trauma first responder. She was amazing. Dr. Laura Asher, and she brought a woman with her who had lost her son to violence. And I'd never met anybody that had lost a child to violence. So she bent down and she put her hand on my knee and she said, I lost my son. And, I'm here to tell you that you will never get over your pain, that it will always feel like this. And I know more about what she meant now, but at the time, I was wondering if I was going to survive at all. And so she was telling me this, and I just put my hand up and I said, stop right there. I said, that you are telling me your journey, but that is not going to be my journey. And I realized in the moment that there was no path for me to follow, that I could forge my own, and that I would need to do that. And I thought about it. I thought, I don't want to be angry for the rest of my life. I don't want to spend the rest of my life railing against something. I want to have joy. And I want my son to have joy. I want to have a good life. JT was only 12 years old. And I knew that was possible if I worked at it. and we've definitely found that.
I have no words to tell you how grateful I am for you to share this, because when you just told me about this woman bending down and telling you it will always be like that, I instantly went to, like with the movement I run, the Loving Life After Loss, I'm a very big defender of, like just myth busting all these ideas of the pain will always stay with you, grief will always be there. And I'm like, I don't believe in that. I believe that we do have a choice how we lead our lives. And I see it as such. I'm like, yes, grief can be like a visitor, it does come back and it does, knock on a door, and it does remind you at times. And there are triggers that bring you back that pain and that memory and all these things. But it doesn't mean that grief stays with me forever. And I certainly am not inviting grief to stay with me. It's like a visitor that comes and goes every now and then, and it's rarer and rarer. And when they do come, I know how to deal with them, but I will certainly not make them a permanent resident in my home. That's how I addressed it. That's how I felt. And by the looks of it, you're dealing with it quite similar to me. There is choice involved, and I knew that I wanted joy. As you said, JT was only 12, and when Rob died so unexpectedly, Flynn and Jed were 10 and 8, and I knew your life's not going to be over because of that. It will be defined by that, no questions asked. But if I make that a positive or a negative, that's up to me and up to them. And now I'm going to do the best I can to create the happiest life I possibly can for these boys, and to teach them how to do that, how to respond to trauma, how to do things differently, despite the entire audience, I want to call it now, the society, standing there and watching us and waiting for us to fall apart. And I'm like, I'm not going to give you what you expect. I'm going to give you what Rob and I wanted for these boys, and that's, I don't care what people think or say about me in that scenario. What counts for me is my boys' happiness, and that's what drove me. I can see that you were doing something very similar, and that's what I love. That's what I absolutely love, that you took something that was so tragic and so deep and so deeply affected you, and created something so amazing and life changing and life saving out of that whole scenario. And that to me is incredible. And that to me makes you such an amazing mom, not just for Jessie, but in particular also for JT, who is here with you, who wants to know what to do with all these emotions, and for you to go on and create a program that is so life-changing. I just want to say a big fat kudos to you. And I'm sure there's a million people who already told you that, but I want to be one of them too. It's incredible, really incredible. I'm so grateful that you shared it with us. So Scarlett, please tell us, how can people actually learn about this program? How can they get in touch with you if they want to? You wrote a book about that too. Is that correct? That is the book title, actually. That's what we see behind you there.
Well, yeah, this is my first book, which is really about the first 6 months of my journey. It's called Nurturing Healing Love. And then I've written since another book called From Sandy Hook to the World. And it's more about the movement, the Choose Love movement that I started. That's the programming now in over 10,000 schools in the US and 120 countries, including Australia. And it's free. So, I really encourage people to register and download. There's a prenatal, there's infant toddler, there's pre-K through 12th grade, scaffolded all the way up. There's clubs and sports, homes and communities. I think it's really important that we take responsibility and we choose to build the world that we want to live in. We model it. And we teach our kids that, yes, they are going to face difficulty, but that is an opportunity for growth, and that we do have a choice. I think people forget that in any situation, circumstance, or interaction, you have a choice. That's our power as human beings, is in our ability to choose from moment to moment how we thoughtfully respond. So I encourage everyone, our website is chooselovemovement.org. Please go on and check it out. And we are spreading by word of mouth and referral. So I would love, if you liked what you heard tonight, or you're interested in that programming, or somebody that could benefit from it, it's no cost. Please just help us spread the word. Oh, and I wanted to share. Can I share one more story before we go?
Absolutely. I just wanted to quickly say, we're going to post the website in the links below, so everybody can read it. That's all I wanted to say. Please share.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to say, you were wrapping up, and I did want to say that Jessie left a message for JT, and he found it the first day that he came back to the farmhouse, and it was this little note. It was about this big, but it was all folded up, and it was on his desk, and it said, "Have a lot of fun." And it was incredible because that was Jessie. You know how you said your boys are so different? JT and Jessie are different too. And JT had been through a lot of trauma earlier in life. And so Jessie was just this like carefree, bouncing off the walls, and he was always having fun. And that was such a perfect last message from a little brother, what he wanted for JT for his life. And then I thought, well, that's for all of us, because it's so important. We have one life to live. And of course, we know beyond just wanting to have fun and joy in our life, how important fun actually is for education and for learning, and even for us big kids. It's a really important thing. So I always say the two most important things that we do every day are choosing love as a thoughtful response in any situation, and having a lot of fun.
Oh my God, this is so beautiful. It gives me goosebumps so much. It almost hurts. It's really ridiculous. I absolutely love it. It's so incredible to have, the messages he left behind that day, like on your car, on your fridge for JT. That's just incredible. It is such a gift, really, to be able to have this message with you and find that. And I just love it. I feel so honored that you shared that with us, because this is really, really beautiful. I hope JT framed the message or put it in resin or something to keep that forever. It's just
framed. It's framed in his
room. in his
Yeah.
heart anyway. So Scarlett, I'm so grateful, massively grateful. I have no words actually to cover what I feel right now, that you and I connected. It is really absolutely beautiful what you have done with the adversity. I would love for you to stay on a little bit after the interview. We're going to finish our live stream here, and thank you so much for being here, and everyone for watching. This is Scarlett and Marie signing off. Bye for now.
Thank you.